Weddings are supposed to be new beginnings. At 44, I thought mine would be just that. A gentle turning of the page after years of disappointments. A chance to write a softer chapter. The vineyard in the Blue Ridge Mountains looked like something from a painting. Rolling hills, rows of vines heavy with spring's first leaves, a courtyard strung with white lights. Friends and family gathered, glasses of champagne catching the last gleam of afternoon sun. The ceremony had been short, almost reverent. My husband, Thomas, had smiled at me with such steadiness that my knees nearly buckled. For the first time in years, I had felt safe. When the music began and guests drifted toward the tables, I told myself, "Remember this, hold on to it, don't let the moment slip away." But happiness, I've learned, is fragile. I was adjusting the veil pinned in my hair when I saw her. My mother. Evelyn. She moved through the courtyard as if she owned it, straight-backed, pearls at her throat, her powder blue dress as crisp as a pressed sheet. In her hands, 2 glasses of red wine. Her smile was polite, even gracious, the sort of smile that photographs well. But it wasn't the kind that warms a daughter's heart. It was the smile I remembered from my childhood, the kind that meant she was already 2 steps ahead of me, that she knew something I did not. "For the bride," she said, her voice a lilting mixture of sweetness and command. She extended the glass toward me. I took it automatically. The stem was cool beneath my fingers. The wine caught the light, ruby red, beautiful. Too beautiful. And then the scent reached me. At first it was nothing, just the richness of grapes, oak, the faint sharpness of tannins. But beneath it, a thread of something wrong. Not spoiled, not sour. Wrong. A medicinal note, sharp and chemical, like the air in hospital corridors or the back of a bathroom cabinet. My body reacted before my mind could. My throat tightened, my stomach clenched. I lowered the glass slightly and forced a smile. "New vintage?" I asked, trying to sound casual. Evelyn's lips curved tighter. "Imported, special for today." She watched me too closely, as though my every gesture was a test. Before I could answer, laughter burst beside me. My sister Claire swept in like a warm breeze. 3 years older, always brighter, always easier in a crowd. Her rose-colored dress flattered her, her cheeks flushed with joy. She touched my arm. "Caught hiding, little sister?" she teased. "You'll never get to finish that drink anyway. Let me steal a sip." Without thinking, I loosened my grip and let her take the glass. "Be my guest," I said, laughing as though it were nothing. Claire winked, raised the glass, and took a swallow. Evelyn, without missing a beat, handed me the second glass she held, her expression serene. Then she drifted back into the crowd, as if nothing had passed between us, but the knot in my stomach remained. I smiled when people looked at me. I danced when Thomas pulled me close, but every breath carried the faint memory of that wrong scent, and the thought I could not shake. My mother's smile was never just a smile. The courtyard was alive with laughter, the clinking of glasses, and the soft murmur of congratulations. Guests drifted between tables, sipping champagne, leaning close to whisper good wishes. The late afternoon sun warmed my shoulders, and for a fleeting moment, I almost allowed myself to relax. Almost. Claire's laughter echoed beside me, bright and careless. She had always been the one to make strangers feel at home and old friends feel younger. That day, in her rose-colored dress, she seemed almost ethereal, a creature of light and motion. I held the glass of red wine from my mother, Evelyn, and the knot in my stomach tightened. I couldn't explain it. Everything looked perfect. The flowers, the white linens, the string lights reflecting in the vineyard's gentle hills. Yet something felt irrevocably off. I raised the glass to my lips, hesitated. The scent hit me again, sweet at first, rich, almost fruity, but then a strange, sharp chemical note lingered underneath. Not rotten, not sour, just wrong. Something I had smelled only once before, in the back of a grandmother's medicine cabinet decades ago. My fingers lingered on the stem. My breath caught. Then Claire leaned closer, wiping a tear from her eye from laughing too hard at a guest's story. "You look like you're hiding out," she teased. "Let me have a sip. You'll never get to finish it anyway." Something inside me clicked. Instinct, memory, fear. Without a thought, I let go of the glass. "Be my guest," I said, smiling as if it were nothing. "You deserve it more than I do." Claire raised the glass and took a long sip, then laughed, tucking a curl behind her ear. My mother watched with that same serene smile, her eyes gleaming with a cold anticipation that only someone who has practiced deception for a lifetime can master. I held the second glass, my fingers trembling slightly, but I did not raise it to my lips. I let the moment pass, a quiet war of or perhaps low blood sugar. No one else saw what I had seen. No one else knew. The glass that had nearly been mine was now empty of its secret. My mother's smile did not falter, not once, and I realized, with a cold certainty, that it had been meant for me. The rest of the evening blurred into polite chaos. I danced with Thomas. I laughed with guests. I answered questions about the ceremony. But beneath it all, a knot remained in my stomach, coiled tighter than ever. That night, when the lights in our home dimmed and I sat alone in my wedding dress, I understood one thing clearly. My mother had crossed a line, and I could never ignore it again. The courtyard had transformed into a scene of gentle panic. Guests rushed forward, hands extended, voices sharp with worry. I felt my heart hammering against my ribs as I moved toward Claire, but even as I ran, a strange calm settled over me, an icy recognition. I had seen this coming. Claire's body lay half-supported by the edge of a chair, her fingers clutching the polished wood, as if it were an anchor to reality. Her lips trembled, parted, trying to speak, but no words came. Her eyes, wide and unseeing, flicked around the courtyard. Thomas was already at her side, kneeling on the stone, his hands steady, voice low and commanding. "Claire, breathe with me. Look at me. You're okay." I knelt beside him, my hand hovering over hers, afraid to touch anything that might make it worse. The memory of the glass, the scent, the strange medicinal note burned in my mind. My mother had handed it to me. I hadn't drank it. Claire had. And now she was lying pale on the floor, the very image of innocence betrayed. Evelyn appeared moments later, emerging from the crowd, as if she had been summoned by some hidden cue. Tissue in hand, she dabbed Claire's forehead with deliberate care, fanning her face with exaggerated concern. "She must be dehydrated," she said, voice soft and rehearsed. "Or perhaps low blood sugar. Poor thing." Her eyes never met mine, but I saw the small, almost imperceptible glimmer, the satisfaction tucked behind her perfect mask. Paramedics arrived swiftly, their presence turning the chaos into organized motion. Claire was lifted gently, her body limp but stable. I followed behind, my mind racing, replaying the moment over and over. I remembered the wine, the way my fingers had lingered on the glass stem, the subtle chemical scent. No one else would connect the dots. To them, this was an unfortunate accident. To me, it was a warning. Later, at the hospital, I sat beside Claire's bed while monitors beeped steadily, her color slowly returning. Thomas held my hand, his eyes searching mine, asking questions I couldn't answer. Not yet, not without proof. My mother's visit was brief but precise. She entered with a soft smile, the kind that photographs beautifully, and stood at the edge of the room. Her hands were cool as she touched my shoulder in passing, almost congratulating me, her voice a low whisper. "You did well, sweetheart." I stiffened. Those words were not of comfort. They were recognition of a performance I hadn't agreed to play. I hadn't cried. I couldn't. Not then. The panic in my chest was thick, leaden, but beneath it simmered clarity. Evelyn had never wanted my happiness. She wanted obedience, control. The rest of the night passed in a blur. Claire, though stable, remained quiet, her energy spent. Thomas and I barely slept, our minds spinning with unspoken questions. I lay awake, remembering every instance from my childhood. The metronome ticking while I struggled at the piano, the strict dress codes, the whispered warnings about friends and lovers. Each memory now threaded into the present, revealing a pattern I had refused to see before. Evelyn's smile haunted me, a reminder that appearances are often a mask for something far darker. I understood, finally, that my life had been a series of carefully orchestrated lessons in obedience. And the wedding day, meant to be my happiest, had only reinforced it. I made a silent promise that night. I would see the truth. Every secret, every manipulation, every hidden act. I would understand the scope of her control, and I would make sure it never happened again. The night stretched long and quiet, the beeping of monitors fading into the background as I sat beside Claire. My fingers traced the edge of the hospital bed, but my mind was elsewhere, back in the rooms of my childhood, in the strict halls of Evelyn's house. Evelyn's smile had always been the same, perfectly measured, polished to a shine, and yet somehow cold. The kind of smile that photographers love, that strangers trust, that children learn to fear. I remembered sitting at the piano for hours, fingers stiff, wrists aching, while she stood behind me with a metronome, tapping steadily, voice low but sharp. "You want to be impressive, don't you?" she had asked. "Talent is nothing without discipline." I had wanted only to play, to let music fill me with joy. But her lessons were never about joy. They were about control. Every note, every mistake, every small triumph measured against her expectations. A child's love was earned only through perfection. Then there were the clothes, the way she chose every outfit, every shoe, every accessory. When I wanted to wear jeans to my cousin's wedding at 13, she produced a cream-colored dress and matching ballet flats. "It will photograph better," she said. "No one likes a girl who looks like she doesn't try." I wore it, obediently, a small part of myself folding into her vision. And the relationships. Andrew, my first love, happy, light, and full of laughter. She met him once, casually, and the next day delivered her verdict. "I don't like the way he looks at you. There's something off about him." I protested. I cried. I tried to argue. She had already woven the seed of doubt. Within days, my certainty dissolved. I ended it. She never mentioned him again, but I remembered everything. Sitting beside Claire now, I realized those were not isolated incidents. They were patterns. Every decision I had thought was mine, every instinct I had followed, had been nudged, pruned, or destroyed by her invisible hand. The wine at the wedding was only the latest in a lifetime of carefully orchestrated control. Evelyn performed kindness like an actress on stage. Her sympathy, her gestures, even her words were props in a play I had been cast in from birth. And I had played my part, applauding myself for obedience, while the script was written entirely by her. The hospital room felt heavy with unspoken truths. Claire slept, exhausted, still pale, and I realized she, too, had been caught in the same performance for decades. The difference was that tonight the stakes were higher. This time, someone could have died. I clenched my fists. It wasn't fear that surged through me, it was clarity. I could see her now, not just as my mother, but as the architect of every manipulation, every withheld truth, every lesson disguised as care. And I understood something else. If I wanted to survive, to protect those I loved, I would have to learn the rules she had played by for years, and then break them. I looked down at Claire, still breathing slowly, and made a silent vow. I would uncover everything. The wine, the old manipulations, The subtle control embedded in my life like threads in a tapestry. No longer would I accept her performance as truth. Tonight, the mask had slipped, and I would not let it slide back into place. The hospital was quiet now. Claire slept, monitors humming a gentle rhythm, while I sat by the window, staring at the empty courtyard outside. The night air smelled faintly of lilac and damp earth, and I felt a strange mixture of exhaustion and clarity. The events of the wedding were still vivid, the glass, the scent, Claire collapsing. But now memories long buried began to rise, threading together a pattern I had been blind to for decades. I thought back to my 8th birthday. Evelyn had insisted the party be perfect, every detail curated. Guests were lined up in the living room, clapping politely as I opened gifts I didn't care for. My cake was a pastel masterpiece, each layer baked and iced according to her specifications. She stood behind me the entire time, smiling, eyes sharp, correcting the way I held my fork, adjusting my posture when I laughed too loudly. At the time, I thought it was love, guidance, but now I saw it clearly. Control disguised as celebration. High school was no different. Every friend she deemed unsuitable vanished from my life almost overnight. She would whisper warnings. "Do you really want to spend time with her? Think carefully." I trusted her instinct, never questioning her motives. My friendships were filtered, my autonomy subtly stripped away. Then came college. Andrew. I remembered him vividly. The boy who made my world lighter, who made me laugh until my stomach ached. She had met him once, smiled politely, then delivered a single sentence the next day. "I don't trust him. He's wrong for you." I had protested, cried even, but the seed had been planted. Doubt consumed me. I ended it, thinking it was my choice. Yet every decision was manipulated, orchestrated, nudged along her invisible lines of control. Even later, at 19, with Dorian, the pattern repeated. My mother's interventions were subtle, but precise. A photo, a whispered warning, a casual comment that disarmed my instincts. Each time I obeyed, not because I wanted to, but because her truths were wrapped in facts I couldn't question. Reality itself had been edited by her hand. Sitting in the dim hospital light, I felt a mix of grief and rage. I was not just witnessing the aftermath of the wine incident. I was seeing the full arc of my life through the lens of manipulation. Every choice, every relationship, every moment of joy carefully shaped, often broken by her hands. The wedding had been the culmination of a lifetime of subtle control. And now I knew I could not ignore it. I could no longer play the obedient daughter, the passive participant in her performances. I had to act not with panic, not with fear, but with precision, strategy, and clarity. I reached for my notebook, the one I had kept since college. One by one, I began to list events, memories, patterns, the piano lessons, the dress codes, Andrew, Dorian, every small instruction that had seemed benign at the time, but now revealed itself as manipulation. I wrote quickly, as if pouring out decades of suppressed recognition, each word a thread connecting past to present. By the time I looked up, the first rays of dawn were brushing the mountains. Claire was stirring, her eyes opening slowly, pale but conscious. I smiled at her, tired but resolute. "We'll figure this out," I whispered. Not just the wine, not just the wedding, everything. Because tonight, the past had finally made sense. And for the first time, I understood that I would no longer be a pawn in my mother's lifelong game. The morning after the wedding, I felt a restless energy I couldn't ignore. Claire was stable, still pale but recovering, and Thomas hovered nearby, trying to make sense of the chaos. I needed answers, more than memories, more than intuition. I needed proof. Then my phone buzzed. A message from Tamara, my oldest friend, flashed on the screen. She had been invited to the wedding, RSVP'd months ago, but never showed up. I opened her message, curious. Iris, I've been thinking about yesterday nonstop. I need to be honest. Your mother called me 2 weeks ago. She said you'd been overwhelmed, not yourself. She asked me not to come, said too many voices might stress you out. I didn't know what to do. I didn't want to disrespect your space. I read it 3 times, each word sinking into me. It was subtle, almost innocuous, but I felt the weight of it immediately. Evelyn had reached out in advance, planting seeds, controlling the narrative even before the wedding began. Tamara's absence was not coincidence. It was part of the same pattern I had seen for years: isolation, manipulation, control. I sat on the edge of the couch, the wedding dress still crumpled beneath me, and stared at the screen. This message was a confirmation of what I had long suspected but had never been able to prove. My mother's interference had extended far beyond the family circle. She had attempted to orchestrate even the guest list, shaping the environment to her liking. The pieces began to click. The strange wine, Claire collapsing, my mother's unnerving calm. These were not isolated incidents. They were symptoms of a system that had been in place for decades, refined, perfected, and now fully revealed. I texted Tamara back, careful to keep my words neutral. Thank you for telling me. I'm glad you did. Her reply was almost immediate. Of course. I had to. Something felt wrong. I realized then that I could no longer rely solely on my instincts. I needed evidence, tangible, undeniable proof of my mother's interference. The wine at the wedding had been the first glaring example, but if I wanted to understand the full scope of her control, I needed to trace every thread, every manipulation. By late afternoon, my mind was racing with plans. I would visit the venue again, under the guise of retrieving a forgotten item from the bridal suite. There, I could search for the remaining bottles, examine the wine, look for anything unusual. Every detail mattered. Every small inconsistency could be the key to understanding what my mother had attempted and how far she was willing to go. I shared my plan with Thomas cautiously. He listened, worry in his eyes, but he did not interfere. He trusted me. I felt a spark of relief. I would not be facing this alone, even if few others truly understood the danger I had narrowly escaped. That night, I began compiling a list: wedding guests who had canceled, gifts that had arrived late, odd instructions my mother had left for staff, messages intercepted, and memories that now seemed connected in ways I hadn't noticed before. Piece by piece, a map was emerging. By the time I closed my notebook, the first real clue had transformed my fear into strategy. Evelyn's control was vast, but not absolute. There were openings, cracks in the armor, and I intended to find every single one. The wine had almost killed me. Now I would ensure that nothing she attempted would go unchecked. The vineyard was quiet when I arrived, the late morning sun soft on the hills, the air carrying the faint scent of lilac and grass. The wedding had been days ago, yet the memory of the glass of red wine lingered like a shadow I could not shake. My hands tightened around my tote bag as I walked toward the event space, heart steady but senses alert. I had called ahead, giving the staff a plausible story about a forgotten bracelet in the bridal suite. Reed, the young man handling post-event logistics, had been polite and accommodating. He led me through the empty halls, chatting casually about leftover decorations and lost items. But my focus was elsewhere, on the wine, on the memory that had nearly claimed me. In the bridal suite, I pretended to search the room, brushing my fingers over empty vanities and peeking behind cushions. Nothing seemed out of place until I noticed a single bottle tucked slightly apart on a distant shelf in the storage area, a handwritten note taped to it. Not on list check. I froze. It wasn't part of the wine inventory I had approved for the wedding. The label was unfamiliar, darker, matte, written in elegant cursive. My pulse quickened. I pointed to it casually. Mind if I check that one? Reed frowned, confused. I don't recall this being part of the stock. Might have been brought by a guest, he said. Just want to make sure it's safe for my sister, I added lightly, keeping my voice calm, steady. She had a reaction the other night. He hesitated, then handed it over. My fingers brushed the glass, cool and unyielding. I held it up to the light, the deep red liquid slightly viscous, the cork undisturbed. Nothing obvious, yet everything felt wrong. The memory of the chemical scent returned, faint but unmistakable. Back in my car, I stared at the bottle, every instinct on alert. I texted Tamara immediately. Found something. Can I drop it off? Her reply was almost immediate. Of course. Bring it. Jules will look at it. Jules, Tamara's college roommate, now a research chemist, was the only person I trusted to analyze it properly. 30 minutes later, I handed the bottle over without speaking, her hand steady as she examined it. I'll handle it carefully, she promised. I nodded, a mixture of fear and resolve settling over me. I realized then that this was the first tangible piece of evidence. Not a memory, not a hunch, something real, physical, tied directly to the wedding, tied directly to my mother's intentions. Driving home, the vineyard fading behind me, I felt the shift inside. The fear that had gripped me since the wedding was still there, but now it had a shape, a focus. This was no longer just about instinct or memory, it was about proof. And once I had proof, I would be ready. The hidden bottle was more than a clue. It was a warning, a confirmation of everything I had long suspected. And for the first time since the wedding, I felt the first spark of control returning to me. The game had changed, and I was no longer just a player, I was a strategist. Back in my apartment, the hidden bottle rested on the kitchen counter like a dark omen. I didn't touch it yet, just looked at it, turning it slowly in my hands, letting its presence focus my thoughts. It was real, it was tangible, and it was proof of something I had only suspected until now. I spread out my notebook, the one where I had been recording patterns, memories, and inconsistencies since the wedding. The wine incident was no longer isolated. It fit into a pattern stretching back years, decades even. Evelyn had never simply guided me. She had orchestrated. Every choice, every relationship, every friend or lover she approved or condemned it, was all part of a web she had woven with meticulous care. I created a chart on a fresh page. Timelines, events, guests, warnings, canceled visits, and strange coincidences. Andrew, Dorian, Tamara. Everyone she had manipulated in some way, whether subtly or overtly. Notes from my childhood piano lessons, school punishments, dress codes, birthday parties. They all aligned along a timeline, highlighting her reach and precision. Then I focused on the wine. I opened my laptop and began tracing the purchase and inventory. Dates, vendors, brands, even handwritten notes from staff. Everything that might indicate tampering or irregularities. Every step I could track would strengthen the connection between the bottle and Evelyn's involvement. I contacted Jules again, this time with a detailed description of the bottle and its origin. She promised careful analysis for sedatives or unusual compounds. I knew that once the chemical report came back, it could become incontrovertible evidence. The thought sent a cold thrill through me. I had waited my whole life to see her actions exposed in a way she could not manipulate or deny. Next, I planned to request the venue's security footage. I phrased it casually, a lost sentimental item, checking timelines. No mention of my mother, no mention of suspicion, just a plausible reason to gain access to video evidence. Every detail mattered. Every carefully worded message could make the difference between proof and doubt. As I worked, a quiet determination settled over me. Fear was still there, like a shadow at the edges of my consciousness, but it no longer controlled me. I had a strategy, a path forward. I could see the game clearly now. Evelyn had spent years controlling perception, manipulating facts, bending reality, but I had begun to untangle it. The hours passed quickly. I cross-referenced guest lists with RSVPs, noting who had been absent and why. I marked interactions between my mother and various friends, anyone she had influenced, even indirectly. Each connection strengthened the narrative forming in my mind. This was deliberate, systematic, and dangerous. By the time the evening light softened outside my window, I had a folder growing on my laptop, labeled simply Mom Incident. Screenshots, messages, notes, dates, observations, evidence of control, proof of manipulation. The bottle waited in the fridge, a dark reminder of the near disaster it represented. Finally, I leaned back in my chair, exhausted but resolute. This wasn't just about the wine anymore. It was about every hidden act, every subtle manipulation, every lie that had shaped my life. I would uncover them all. Piece by piece, I would expose the system she had built. And when the time came, Evelyn would have no masks left to hide behind. The game had shifted. And now, I was leading. The following morning, I felt a restless urgency I could no longer ignore. The hidden bottle, the guest messages, the wine, it was all converging into a single, undeniable truth. Evelyn had manipulated my life for decades. But proof required more than intuition. I needed witnesses, records, anything that could corroborate what I had long feared. I started with old friends, people who had drifted away for reasons that had seemed trivial at the time. I drafted careful messages, neutral but probing, asking if they remembered specific events or odd instructions from my mother. Every response was revealing. Some had vague recollections of interventions that now seemed calculated. Others remembered explicit warnings or restrictions that had shaped their interactions with me. Each memory was a puzzle piece. Then there was Dorian. The thought of him brought a surge of anger and relief. He had been cut from my life, not by choice, but by design. I sent a brief message, careful not to over-explain. I'd like to meet. There are things we need to clarify about the past. Within the hour, he replied, cautious but willing. Meeting him felt surreal. The quiet coffee shop, mismatched chairs and tables, the smell of roasted beans. It was ordinary, mundane, and yet a stage for truths long buried. I watched him over the rim of my cup, noting the steadiness in his eyes. When I asked about my mother's involvement, he confirmed every suspicion. Evelyn had twisted facts, presented selective truths, even commissioned others to monitor him. A photo he had been shown was doctored to fabricate an impression. I felt my chest tighten, not at the betrayal itself, but at the precision of her manipulation. Next, I sought Tamara again. Her presence at the wedding, or rather, her absence, was now a thread in the larger tapestry. She confirmed that my mother had actively influenced decisions, even before the ceremony. Every precaution, every polite request, every cancellation was deliberate. By midday, I had compiled a timeline. Interventions, warnings, manipulated events, false narratives, names, dates, and details lined up with chilling precision. My mother had built a framework of control, affecting not just me, but everyone who came into proximity with me. Friends, lovers, colleagues, each had been guided, subtly or overtly, to fit her vision. I paused, looking at the notes scattered across the table. Each entry was another layer peeled back from her facade. Each confirmed detail strengthened the case I was quietly building. And yet, for all the evidence, one truth remained. Confrontation would be inevitable. Evelyn had operated in shadows for decades. Now, I had illumination on my side. As evening fell, I felt a mixture of exhaustion and resolve. The past had been revealed, layer by layer. Witnesses had confirmed what memories alone could only hint at. And in that clarity, I realized that the next step, strategic, deliberate, and controlled, was approaching. Tonight, the groundwork was laid. Tomorrow, I would begin to confront the reality of my mother's manipulation head-on. The pieces were in place, and the game was no longer hers to command. The next morning, I woke with a clarity I hadn't felt in years. The wine incident, the hidden bottle, the messages from Tamara, and Dorian's confirmation, they were no longer isolated fragments. Each piece fit into a larger picture, a mosaic of manipulation and control meticulously crafted by my mother over decades. Today, I would start consolidating everything. I cleared the dining table, placing my notebook at the center. Around it, I arranged printed emails, screenshots of text messages, scanned photos of the unknown wine bottle, and a copy of Mr. Elwood's handwritten statement about what he had seen that night. Each item was a thread, and together, they began to form a tangible record of my mother's actions. I labeled folders on my laptop: timeline, witness statements, chemical evidence, manipulation records. Into these folders went every piece of verifiable proof. Tamara's message about my mother discouraging her attendance, Dorian's account of the doctored photo and surveillance, and the details from the wine bottle analysis. Even my own childhood memories now had corroboration, providing context to patterns I had long sensed, but could not fully articulate. By mid-afternoon, the folder labeled Mom Incident was growing thick. I leaned back in my chair, letting the enormity of it settle over me. For the first time, I realized I had the means to confront my mother, not with emotion, not with accusation, but with evidence. The power dynamic that had always favored her was shifting. I texted Claire and Tamara, carefully wording a plan. They would be my witnesses, allies in the confrontation. It wasn't about punishment. It was about transparency, about drawing boundaries that had been absent my entire life. Both replied promptly, their messages steady and supportive. I felt a wave of reassurance. I would not face this alone. Next, I rehearsed what I would say. Not emotionally charged declarations, but statements grounded in fact. I imagined the scene: the table set for a family gathering, the evidence laid out like cards in a hand, my voice calm, deliberate. Each question I might face, each objection, I prepared responses rooted in proof. I would not allow her to twist reality as she always had. Then came the hardest part: imagining her reaction. Evelyn had always projected calm, charm, and authority, even in moments when her intentions were sinister. I envisioned her reading the dossier I had assembled, her carefully curated mask beginning to crack under the weight of documented truth. The thought steeled me. I could no longer allow fear or uncertainty to dictate my actions. As evening approached, I reviewed every piece one last time. The text messages, the scanned documents, the photos, and the lab report confirming the chemical presence in the wine all lined up. The case was airtight. I was ready. I set the files aside and sat in silence, listening to the night settle outside. The city lights flickered faintly, but inside me, a new kind of illumination had taken root: resolve. The confrontation was not vengeance, it was justice, clarity, and liberation. Tomorrow, the past would meet the present. The evidence was ready. And for the first time in my life, I felt that I, not my mother, was in control. The house smelled of lavender, orderly and calm, the scent of familiar mask I had grown up with. I stepped inside, my hands steady, my mind focused. Evelyn greeted me at the door, pearls gleaming, smile poised, as if nothing had changed. "Darling, how wonderful to see you," she said, her voice smooth, warm. But I noticed the tension beneath it, subtle yet undeniable. "I need to talk," I said simply, closing the door behind me. I didn't ask. I didn't preamble. I led her to the dining table, where my laptop, documents, and the hidden bottle sat neatly arranged. Her smile faltered the first time she glimpsed the evidence. I opened the first folder. Texts from Tamara, detailing my mother's preemptive control over guests. Dorian's account of doctored photos and surveillance. screenshots from the wedding staff noting the unusual bottle. Every piece of proof lined up in precise, undeniable order. Evelyn's expression remained composed, but her eyes flicked nervously to the screen. "Iris, what is this?" she asked, a touch too light. "This," I said, letting my hand hover over the scanned lab report, "is the wine you brought to my wedding. Traces of lorazepam, a sedative, enough to cause disorientation and collapse." I watched as recognition flashed across her face, quickly masked. She tried the old charm. "Iris, you're overreacting. It was a misunderstanding." I shook my head. "Not a misunderstanding. Everything here from my childhood to the wedding is documented. The texts, the witnesses, the chemical analysis, every subtle manipulation, every interference you orchestrated, it's all here." She leaned back, maintaining her mask of calm, but I saw the cracks. The perfect composure she had worn for decades was beginning to falter. "I've lived my life under your control," I continued, voice steady. "From my friendships to my relationships, even the people I trusted. You shaped them, shaped me, and hid behind care and concern. No more. I have evidence, witnesses, and a record of your actions, and I will not be silenced or manipulated any longer." Evelyn's lips tightened. She opened her mouth, closed it again. For a moment, there was silence. The house felt smaller, the scent of lavender heavy and false. "Iris," she said finally, softer, a tinge of fear in her tone. I only wanted to protect you." I shook my head slowly. "No, this wasn't protection. It was control, and I see it now." I let the words settle between us. The air was charged. The decades of subtle manipulation crystallized in this moment. For the first time, I saw her as she truly was, not the mother I had imagined, not the charming orchestrator, but a person who had weaponized care into control. I did not feel anger, not fully. I felt clarity. "I will no longer live in a world you've edited," I said. "This ends now. Not with chaos, not with fear, but with truth. From today, I set the boundaries. You will no longer dictate my life, or the lives of those I love." Evelyn stayed silent, her eyes briefly meeting mine. For the first time, I had the upper hand. I had the evidence, I had the clarity, and I was free.